5 Home Invasion Horror Street Ories. It was a cold September night in Ash Grove, Missouri. The wind dragged dry leaves across the driveway like whispers too afraid to speak. At exactly 1:13 a.m., someone knocked once on the glass back door. Madeline, 23, a local art student with shoulder-length blonde hair, was staying with her 2 friends, Drew and Lila, for the weekend. The house belonged to Drew's uncle and sat on the edge of the woods, quiet and removed from town. They were planning a simple movie night and had barely noticed the storm rolling in. But when the power cut out halfway through the film, the mood shifted. Lila lit a candle in the kitchen. Drew went to check the fuse box outside. That's when Madeline heard the knock. Not loud, not urgent, just once. But it was too late for anyone to be visiting. She froze, staring toward the door, heart pounding. A tall figure in a dark jacket stood on the back patio, face hidden behind a smooth, pale mask. His smile was carved wide, a grin that didn't move. He tilted his head slowly, as if amused by her silence. Madeline backed away without screaming. Drew returned minutes later, soaked from rain, but the figure was gone. They locked every door. Lila insisted it was probably a prank, but the feeling didn't leave. A tension hung in the air, like a bad dream no one wanted to admit having. At 2:04 a.m., the motion light outside flickered on again. This time, the masked man was closer, standing at the living room window, watching. They could see his breath, fogging up the glass. Madeline whispered to Lila not to move. Drew reached for his phone, but it had no signal. The masked man began tapping, slowly, one finger at a time. Then he stopped. Madeline thought he had disappeared again, until she saw him reflected in the hallway mirror behind her. He was inside. She didn't scream. She couldn't. He stepped toward her calmly, with that same awful grin. Lila yelled for Drew, who burst from the side room. In the confusion, the masked man vanished again. Doors were still locked, windows unbroken, but he had been in the house. They didn't sleep that night. At sunrise, they left for town. But as they drove away, Madeline glanced back once. He was standing at the edge of the trees, watching, still smiling, and he had something in his hand. Madeline's missing earring. It was late October in Bloomington, Indiana. The rain had been falling steadily for hours, soaking the narrow streets and filling the air with the smell of wet earth and rust. In the back alley behind a forgotten townhouse, he stood under a broken streetlight, his mask gleaming faintly, smiling without emotion. Madeline hadn't spoken much since that weekend in Ash Grove. She tried to act normal, but Drew and Lila knew something was still wrong. She kept checking windows, locking doors twice, sometimes staring into empty corners for too long, hoping it was over. They had driven down to Bloomington to meet another friend, Caden, an old college buddy of Drew's who had inherited a century-old home downtown. It was the kind of house that creaked even when no one moved, with a half-finished basement and warped floors. Caden had invited them for the week. They arrived on a Wednesday. By Thursday night, it had started again. Madeline swore she heard footsteps outside her room around 2 a.m., but no one believed her. Until Lila found scratches on the inside of the kitchen window the next morning. Deep, fresh, and curved, like they had been made by fingertips. They tried to laugh it off, blamed raccoons, blamed the age of the house. But when Drew went to check the backyard security camera, the feed had been wiped. Every night from midnight to 4 a.m. had gone black. Caden started getting unnerved. His dog refused to go near the basement door. At dinner, he told a story about how the house had belonged to his great uncle, who used to rent the basement out to strange tenants. One of them disappeared in the 90s. No one asked too many questions. That night, Madeline woke up to find the hallway light on. She stepped outside her room. At the far end of the hall stood a tall figure in a black jacket, unmoving. She whispered Drew's name, but no answer came. The figure began walking slowly toward her, each step deliberate. She slammed her door and locked it. Drew and Caden burst in seconds later, but the hallway was empty again. They searched every inch of the house. The doors were locked, the windows untouched, but the basement door was open, just slightly. They argued the next day. Caden wanted them gone. Drew insisted on staying to get answers. Madeline wanted to leave. She felt watched all the time. That night, Lila went missing. They found her the next morning, lying in the attic crawl space, asleep but shivering. She had no memory of how she got there. Her wrists were faintly red, as if they had been held. She said she'd been dreaming of someone breathing beside her bed and laughing. By now, they all believed. The masked man was not a dream. He was stalking them, playing with them. That evening, the lights went out again. The sound of heavy boots echoed from below. Drew grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the basement. Caden followed. Madeline stayed in the living room with Lila, who refused to move or speak. Downstairs, the air was damp and cold. The basement was bigger than they remembered. There were new markings on the walls. Circles, scratches, symbols, some still wet. And on the far wall, the mask, hung up like a trophy. Then a noise behind them, a click. The basement door had shut. Upstairs, Madeline heard it too. She turned to Lila, but Lila was staring at something behind her. He was there again, not at the window, inside, in the hallway, his head tilted. He raised a hand and waved, slowly. Then he walked into the dark kitchen. Madeline ran, dragged Lila behind her, locked them in the guest room. Downstairs, Drew and Caden pounded the door, but it wouldn't budge. The flashlight flickered. From the shadows in the basement corner, something began to move. Not a man, not completely. The mask appeared again, but it wasn't worn. It floated in the air like a face with no head. The laughing started, low and broken, as if several voices were trying to sound like one. Then silence. Upstairs, Madeline opened the door slowly. The house was still. She tiptoed to the kitchen. On the table sat an old Polaroid, a photo of her, sleeping, taken from the edge of her bed. A second photo slid from under the door. It was Drew and Caden, standing in the basement. Behind them, the masked man. Not in the mask. Without it. And his face was hers. Seattle, Washington, late November. The rain never stopped, and neither did he. Outside the apartment window, under the orange glow of a traffic signal, the man in the mask stood still, watching. Madeline hadn't left the apartment in 3 days. After Bloomington, she and Lila had driven northwest to stay with an old friend, Tori, a tech analyst living in a high-rise. They thought distance might help. It didn't. Drew and Caden were still missing. No word, no signal. Their phones went dark the night they entered the basement. Madeline kept the Polaroid with her, the one of the masked man wearing her face. She hadn't told Lila. She couldn't. Tori's apartment was modern, full of security systems and backup power. Lila spent most of her time curled on the couch, headphones on, eyes avoiding corners. Madeline kept checking the hallway camera. On the third night, the power flickered. Then came static on every screen. Television, phone, even the digital clock on the stove buzzed white for 2 seconds. And when it cleared, the hallway feed showed something impossible. The masked man was inside the elevator, not moving, not pressing buttons, just standing there. Tori dismissed it as a glitch. But at 2 a.m., someone knocked on the door 3 times. Soft, hollow. Madeline stood frozen. Tori checked the peephole. No one there. But when she opened the door, the carpet outside had footprints. Wet, bare. They locked every bolt, blocked the door with chairs. But the next morning, the word "look" was scratched onto the inside of the bathroom mirror. It wasn't steam. It was etched into the glass. That evening, Lila began humming, a strange melody, low and rhythmic. She didn't remember learning it, said she heard it in a dream. A room of static. The masked man was there, smiling, whispering the tune. Tori ran a scan through her home network. Every device had been accessed at 3:33 a.m. A remote connection had opened her microphone, her speaker, her camera. Something or someone had been inside her systems. Madeline begged to leave. Lila agreed. But when they went to pack, every item in Madeline's bag had been rearranged into the shape of a spiral. Her phone was missing. Tori offered to drive them to a hotel. They took the elevator down together, floor by floor. But when the doors opened, in the lobby, it wasn't the lobby anymore. The lights were red, the walls were mirrored, and across the hall he stood again, his head tilted, fingers twitching slightly. They tried to go back up. The elevator didn't move. Tori reached for the emergency button. The masked man stepped forward. With each step, the red light flickered. Then the mirrors cracked without sound, and the hallway behind him shimmered no longer solid, but moving like mist. A door appeared behind him, wood, old, with a rusted handle. He opened it and pointed, not with menace, with certainty, as if they had been expected. Lila stepped forward. Madeline screamed and grabbed her. Tori pulled them both back. The elevator shut. They rode in silence. When they returned to the apartment, it was no longer theirs. The photos on the walls were different. Their faces were in them, but older. Lila's hair was shorter. Madeline had a scar she didn't recognize. And in one photo, the masked man stood in the background, face blurred, hand on Madeline's shoulder. That night, the static returned. Not on the screen, in the room. Every corner buzzed. Light bulbs dimmed without flickering. And from behind the wall, a voice repeated one word, over and over. Remember. Madeline woke up to find a new Polaroid. This time, of Tori. In the bathtub. Eyes closed. A hand reaching up from the water behind her. She rushed to the bathroom. Tori was fine, confused. But there were wet footprints leading away from the tub, and the hallway camera now played on loop. The masked man, standing outside their door. Not from last night, from 3 nights ago, and again from 2, and again from this morning. He had never left. Late October, Portland. The storm was approaching, fierce winds howling outside. Inside, a silence hung heavy except for the sound of their hurried breathing. Madeline, Lila, and Tori hadn't left the apartment in days. The masked man had grown closer, his presence unmistakable, suffocating. Each moment felt like a countdown, and the clock was ticking faster. Tori's tech-savvy mind couldn't make sense of the pattern, yet something in her gut screamed. The man's connection to them wasn't random, it was personal, and Madeline felt it every time she looked in the mirror, where she swore his face blurred in the reflection. Lila was losing herself, her once bright eyes now hollow, as if the life drained from them with each passing night. She'd started murmuring, as though someone whispered to her in the dark. The whispers grew louder. It wasn't a dream anymore. It was real. Madeline turned to Tori. "We need to leave," she said, clutching the edge of the table as if it would ground her. Tori hesitated. "Where? We can't run forever." Then the lights went out. The hum of the refrigerator died. The quiet was unbearable. They rushed to the window, the rain beating against the glass like 1,000 tiny fists. But when they looked out, the man in the mask stood across the street. This time, he was not still. He was moving, his head jerking unnaturally, as though he was searching for something or someone. A knock. Soft but deliberate. It wasn't at the door. It was the wall. They turned in unison. The knocking continued, and it grew louder with every strike. Tori yanked open the door to find no one, but the hall was different. There were no doors, no windows, only a dark void. The walls pulsed, like they were alive. Then, the temperature dropped. Breathe in, and the air felt thick with the stench of mildew and decay. They heard a low growl from deep within the darkness, and then there he was. The masked man, standing in the hallway, his eyes wide and manic beneath the mask. He took one step forward, then another. Tori stumbled back, but Lila didn't move. Her eyes glazed over. She stepped toward him. Madeline screamed, "Lila, no!" But Lila's expression was blank, her hands reaching for him as if entranced. The man grinned, but it was not a smile. It was a promise, a beckoning. Before Madeline could move, the walls around them shook, and a voice, too soft to hear, whispered through the air, "You can't escape." The room around them began to warp. The walls stretched and contracted, breathing in rhythm with the masked man. The floor beneath their feet felt like it was turning to liquid. Tori grabbed Madeline's arm, pulling her back. "Run, now." But as they turned to flee, the door slammed shut in front of them. Locked. Tori hammered at the door, desperation flooding her. "Why won't it open?" she gasped, sweat running down her face. The room was tightening. The shadows were closing in. In the darkness, the masked man loomed closer, his presence overwhelming. And then, the walls began to whisper his Nameño, their name. Madeline. Tori. Lila. The trio spun around, but the whispers seemed to come from every corner, twisting their names. Tori's breath caught in her throat. She was shaking. The truth was too much. "It's you," she whispered, eyes wide. "You're the key. We were never supposed to escape." The masked man's smile grew. He stepped closer, moving like liquid, twisting unnaturally toward them. Then the air cracked. A low, unbearable sound, as though the fabric of reality was tearing. Tori reached for the window, her fingers trembling. But just as she grabbed the edge, a hand shot out from the shadows. The hand that belonged to the masked man. His fingers curled around her wrists like iron, pulling her back into the darkness. "No one escapes," he whispered, his voice cold and twisted. Madeline shoved against the door, but it wouldn't budge. Lila was lost to the shadows, her eyes staring at nothing. Only the man remained in the corner of her vision, his haunting mask forever etched in her mind. With one final, desperate attempt, Madeline ran. But she wasn't sure if she was running from the manor, from herself. As the room swirled into chaos, she heard the unmistakable sound of the mask's laughter. It echoed in the darkness, reverberating against the walls. And as she looked back, she saw him again. The masked man, standing still in the doorway. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Madeline, shaking, closed her eyes. And in that moment, she realized something. They had never been in control. Not of the room. Not of the man. Not of their fate.